Psychotherapy Networker. And we are here today. If you're scrolling, you might want to pause just for a moment because we're here with Dr. James Gordon, Jim, as he likes to go by, who is one of those, he's a psychiatrist who practices psychotherapy, a real legend in the field. If psychotherapy has its own Rambo, it's Dr. Jim Gordon. He didn't know I was going to say that. But one of the reasons we invited Jim to be with us today is because Jim, unlike so many others, he travels the world entering crisis zones. He's been in Gaza. He just got back from Ukraine, several trips to Ukraine, Ecuador. He was on the ground days after several American school shootings, whether it was Parkland or Uvalde. Dr. Gordon has been on the ground in the midst of crisis. And what I asked him to do here for the networker audience of therapists is to talk to us a little bit about treating trauma when the trauma isn't past. So many of our clients come in with traumatic experiences, but those experiences are somewhere back here. What Jim specializes in is treating trauma, particularly with children who are in the midst of war or a mass shooting or any other kind of crisis. If there's a national or international crisis in the last 30 years, chances are Jim has been on the ground there helping the people who survived. So if you don't know him, please stick around. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. Two things before we bring Jim on here. Number one is if you're here with us today, we really appreciate it. At Psychotherapy Network, we're a nonprofit and we're here to serve therapists and tell therapists stories. If you'd like to get our magazine, which is one of the largest magazines read by therapists around the world, we have a really special offer that Cole will put up on the screen. You can go there, you can do that. We would love to have you as one of our readers. We publish every other month a really beautiful magazine. And then we publish daily and weekly online for subscribers. We also put up a lot of free content. The second thing I want to mention is that Jim's the author of a really great book called Transforming Trauma. And this book is a bit of a companion guide for working with your clients. It's something you can give to clients, something you can work with clients through. It's something you as a therapist could read. And that book, I believe, is placed right there behind your Ukraine bear. Good product placement. Jim.
Here it is in English, but it will soon be in Ukrainian. It's in a bunch of languages. It will soon be in Ukrainian.
Awesome. So that's Jim's book. A lot of the ideas he'll share today are in that book. So Jim, welcome so much to Psychotherapy Networker. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you, Zach. It's good to be here, and it's always good to be part of the networker community. And I want to recommend the Psychotherapy Networker, the journal, the magazine. I've written for it. I've been interviewed for it. I read it, so I recommend it to viewers.
Yeah. Jim, if not to get too deep in the historical weeds, but Jim's been around since the very beginning when Rich Simon started this organization to serve therapists and tell the stories of therapy. Jim was right there when he started his own organization called the Center for Mind Body Medicine, which is what operates throughout the world in some of these war zones and crisis zones. So Jim, I want to ask you, what is it about you? Well, let's go here. You just got back from Ukraine recently. You've been there a couple of times. You met with the First Lady in Ukraine. You've met with the people in Ukraine. And you met with therapists in Ukraine. What is it that you are telling and teaching them about treating trauma in the middle of a war zone and a war that's only escalating right now?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. I have not yet met with the First Lady, who is particularly interested in mental health, but we're trying to schedule an interview so I can interview her for USA Today, for which I've written about Ukraine recently.
Great.
I think that the most important thing is that there is a kind of dictum that's been around for a while that you shouldn't work with the trauma until it's over. That people are too overwhelmed, that they're dealing with survival and they can't They're not in a place to talk about what's happening. And I think that's by and large not true. I think the important thing to begin with is to be willing to offer people the opportunity to talk with you, to learn from you as soon as possible when the trauma has happened. If they say, no, I can't do it right now, that's fine. But to be there and to make that offer. I've done that repeatedly, as you said, in school shootings and Sandy Hook and Parkland in Uvalde, Texas, and other places as well. And it's people really appreciate that. They appreciate that you're not afraid of or put off by the overwhelming trauma that they have.
Mhm.
I think so. It means being present and being open to it. And I think one of the things, again, I'm going to back up a little, is that in order to work with people who are traumatized, particularly in the middle of the trauma, we have to deal with our own issues first. So when I wrote Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, the idea is you read it yourself as the therapist. You work with these tools and techniques. I do, so do my 150 Center for Mind Body Medicine faculty. Every day we're working with the techniques. We're healing the trauma of our own past, and we're dealing with the challenges that we're facing now.
Mhm.
So when we come to work with people who are in the midst of trauma, we we allow ourselves to relax into that place and to be present and to feel with them, to have that kind of empathy and compassion with them as they're going through the trauma, and to say to them from our own experience, not just with other clients or patients, but with ourselves, it's possible to come through. It's possible to come through because all of us have experienced trauma. And if we haven't already, we soon will. It's just a part of being human. So we have to convey that sense of possibility and realistic hope based on our own experience. The second thing that you and I talked about a little bit before that's really important, if possible, is to not only work with individuals, but bring people together in a group. One
Mhm.
of the things that happens when we're traumatized on a biological level is our capacity to connect with other people is also inhibited. So, in sometimes in a war zone or after a school shooting, or with police we've worked with who've been involved in episodes of sort of mass violence in their community, they feel like they're going through what they're going through by themselves, even though it's obvious that so many other people are also affected. So it's really important. And I think any of us who's worked with trauma over time would agree that bringing people together in a non-forcing but kind of supportive small group where they can share their experience with one another is crucially important. And in Ukraine, one of the examples is there's so many girls and women who have been raped in Ukraine, and that's a taboo subject. It's difficult to talk about in any culture. And if you can bring people together, not necessarily to talk about rape or to talk about the abuse, but simply to come together to share their experience with each other and learn some techniques to help themselves, that creates the kind of safe place that people need when they have just been traumatized or they're continuing to live in the midst of trauma.
Mhm. You're absolutely right. I would imagine a lot of therapists watching now have heard at least the message that, if they're working with a child in the midst of a situation they can't get out of, that you really can't start psychotherapy. You can't, like, there's only so much you can do until that child is in a safe environment. Say more about how, because certainly, I guess in the United States, we're not in a war zone, but I would imagine a lot of people who work with children here in the States are working with children who are in difficult, if not traumatic environments that they can't get out of. And I want to speak to those therapists who are working with those kids or young people who who are in those situations. It's not ideal. And I've been in that situation as a therapist. The kid, I was like, boy, if we could just get this kid out of this home, we we might be a lot better off, but we couldn't. What is your message to therapists who aren't maybe dealing with war zone, but are working with children in difficult situations they can't get out of? How do you help them?
Well, there's a lot that can be done. even with kids who are unable at that moment to get out of the situation. First of all, they have a place to go to talk about what's going on, and somebody who is not going to. I mean, living in those kinds of abusive situations, there's retaliation for everything that you say, every protest of any kind. And here's a place with a therapist where you can actually, with a child, or for that matter, an adult, can actually talk about what's going on and can develop strategies for dealing with it. I mean, people who've successfully navigated difficult childhoods have developed on their own strategies to deal with those abusive parents or caregivers or siblings. So we can help, we can, sort of formulate with the kids or the adults, what do you do when the situation comes up? How do you deal with it best? Um, and then little by little, I remember one girl who was in a pretty abusive situation. She was a teenager, and she was cutting herself, and she'd been diagnosed as schizoaffective and bipolar, as well as major depression and ADHD, all these diagnoses. And the psychiatrist, she'd been hospitalized 3 times, and the psychiatrists were throwing drugs at her, and nothing. She was living under the stairs in the basement at her home. And this is a middle class girl. And she had been totally unresponsive to any therapist. And so finally, the parents brought her to me. And so I talked with her, and she really didn't want to talk about her anger or her cutting or her hallucinations or her suicidal feelings. I said, well, there's any way I can help. She said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have these pimples on my face. And because of all the medication I've been given, I put on weight. Can you help with that? And I said, sure. And so we started to talk about what a better diet would look like. We started to talk about how to move her body and exercise more. And we started to talk about dealing with the stress that contributes to weight gain and putting on the. So we're working with all the same issues, but she wasn't ready to talk about the trauma. We were working on what was important to her. And little by little, she began to feel better about herself and start taking care of herself. And finally, as she began to do that, the situation at home, and she said, my parents are still crazy as hell. I said, what now? She said, I got to get out of here. Can you help me? So at that point, after several months, after the parents saw that she was doing better, then they were willing to talk about this other possibility.
Hmm.
Because up until then, oh, she's too sick, she's too crazy, she can't do this, she can't do that. So I think it's a matter of really, and it's a cliche, but it's a good one, of meeting people, including kids, where they're at, what's important to them, not what we think because of our diagnostic categories is the most important thing to do, and to be flexible, and to be, you may not be you don't have to be an expert in eating disorders or nutrition to help somebody, to give somebody a little information about how to eat in a more healthy way, or how to exercise, or how to deal with stress. So we did the same program we would have done for her schizoaffective or her depression, but to help her lose the weight and get rid of her pimples. That was her concern. So we really need to listen carefully. In the middle of great trauma, what may be going on is not the thing you think it is. It may be something else. It may be, I can't get along with my classmates. You just have to listen for that and be willing to hear beyond your preconception.
That's a really good point. You, I think, just being familiar with your work, I think you do a fair bit with drawing and expressive art and crafting and all of that. I'm wondering if you have a story either from Ukraine or Gaza or wherever you might have been, a school shooting site, where how do you implement, these groups of kids and doing artwork to express themselves?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to start off by is demystifying. I'm not an art therapist, but art is the property of all humans on the planet, and we can all do some drawings and learn from the drawings. So right away, when we're working with kids or adults for that matter, and we're doing you can do this with individuals, but much of our work in war zones and other places where there's mass tragedy is with groups, because we want to have social support and we want to be able to work with far more people. So in Gaza, for example, there's a story that I'll tell you, and people can see the visual on the CMBM website, cmbm.org, because 60 Minutes filmed and featured this little girl in the story. And we had a group that was being led by a teacher in Gaza. Gaza had had the last of three major wars in 2014, and this little girl's father was killed in the war, and she was in a group of 8 kids whose father was killed. That was the criteria for membership in the group. And the group was being led by a school teacher. This is an important point. We can teach people, we do teach people at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, who are both very experienced psychotherapists and psychiatrists and physicians, but we also teach people who are committed to helping their communities, like teachers or clergy or military veterans. Anyway, this group was being led by a high school teacher. And in the first group, we teach slow, deep breathing to balance the fight or flight response. And then we also get the kids up and moving their bodies to get rid of some of the excess tension and to help counterbalance the freeze response. So we get kids kind of more relaxed, and then we do drawings, and we have them draw themselves. Draw yourself with your biggest problem, and draw yourself with your problem solved. Now, in this particular instance, a little girl whose name is Azar Jandia, she combined drawing herself and drawing herself with her biggest problem. So she drew a picture of Israeli planes coming overhead, bombing the homes in her community, including her home. She drew a picture of her father, bloody and dead on the ground, out right next to her destroyed home, of her 2 uncles, also bloody and dead, and then slightly separate, because there's separation between men and women in society in Gaza, was her aunt, also dead. So the home is destroyed, the neighborhood's destroyed, her father's dead, 2 uncles and an aunt are dead, and then she draws herself in the corner. And she's this little tiny stick figure with the mouth turned down. She says, that's me. And then she draws the third drawing, which is the solution to her problem. And usually in this first set of drawings, and people who are watching us, you can do these drawings, to explore for yourself, or look in Transforming Trauma. You can read the complete script of it. But in the third drawing, there's usually something positive, something the solution is, maybe I'll make, I'm imagining a solution. It might be, I have other friends, or I can go to my other uncle, or I can go to my other aunt. No, the solution to Azar's problem was for her to be dead in the grave with her father. And she said, there is nothing for me in this life. The only thing for me that means anything is to be with my father. And incidentally, there was another kid in the group, a boy. He was 8, Azar is 9. This boy drew himself with a suicide belt on, and saying the only solution to my problem is to become a suicide bomber and kill the people who killed my father. 9 groups later, Azar is learning to use different forms of meditation, mindful eating. She's learning to use guided imagery. She's working with biofeedback. She's learning to control autonomic nervous system functioning. She's developing a sort of a knowledge of and connection with a genogram, sort of the map of her family, sharing her experience with these other kids in the group. She does a second set of drawings in the final group, in the 9th group. She draws herself, and she's a big girl in the drawing. She occupies the middle of the page. She's got these wonderful brown curls that are coming down, and there's an arrow coming from her chest through a heart to a tree that's flowering. And written in the heart is, I love nature. And when we ask Azar about this drawing, she says, yes, since I've started these groups, I've learned to love myself, and I love nature as well. And then we say, okay, the second drawing is, where are you going to get to? Where do you want to go to? Which is kind of the equivalent of the solution to her problem in the first set of drawings. Mm-hmm. And she draws herself in a white coat with a stethoscope around her neck, and lying on a examining table in front of her, there is a figure. And I say, what's going on? And she said, I am a doctor. I am a heart doctor. Ever since the the fighting here, so many people in Gaza have had their hearts hurt, and I'm there to help this person. And I
Hmm.
say, who are these other five figures standing next to them? She big grin. She looks at me and she says, "Those are my other patients. They're waiting for me." And then I asked the third drawing is, how are you going to get there? And she draws very practically. She draws stacks of books. She draws school books, and she draws medical school books. And she said, I'm going to study very hard.
Hmm.
And the little boy, and this is not on 60 Minutes, but the little boy's in that second set of drawings, he draws himself in a car. This is a little boy who wanted to be a suicide bomber. And I said, what's going on here? He said, I am the driver for the first president of Palestine. And so he's gone from a completely, sort of violence-ridden, revenge-seeking identity to an identity as somebody who's a productive member of a hoped-for new society.
Hmm.
So the drawings give kids an opportunity to get in touch with all the feelings and the whole picture of what
Yeah.
they've been through, as well as to imagine after they've had experiences that have reinforced their capacity to understand and take care of themselves and share their experience, after they've had those 9 or 10 groups, give them
Mhm.
an opportunity to express what's possible.
Yeah. Wow. What a story, Jim. That I hadn't heard that one, but I imagine if you're like me watching this, there was a moment there I was like, Jim, where is this going? And what struck me is how many times we're a little afraid as therapists, maybe it's just me, I don't want to speak for anybody else, of some of those darker, even more violent feelings that our trauma surviving clients, kids or adults can sometimes have, particularly right after or in the midst of a traumatic situation. And it sounds like you allow space for even thoughts of becoming a suicide bomber or even thoughts of wanting to be dead, and just creating that safe space. I know I've watched a lot of Lisa Ferentz's trainings, who's another trainer at Networker, who allows clients to draw the body part that they want to maybe harm for those clients who self-harm. And that all this can be kind of scary sometimes. How do you deal with it when a client is drawing and expressing thoughts like this?
Well, I think that's our work. And I'm glad you're asking the question, because primary work that we do at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, that our faculty does for themselves, as well as for the thousands of people we've supervised who've come through our trainings, we have to deal with our own stuff. That's our fear. And we have to be able to deal with our own trauma and to go through the pain of facing it and of facing potentially the despair that we may feel. Then we can sit calmly because we've been there. We know that that's not an unfamiliar country to us. And we
Mm-hmm.
can sit and we know that we've come through it. We're still here. And we have this possibility of belief that other people can come through it as
Mm-hmm.
well. And if you and that's on the one side, that's on the positive side. So you have to deal with your own anxiety. That's the major issue in dealing with these kids and adults. It's not their quote psychopathology or the depth of their problems. Yeah, of course that has to be attended to. But the difficulty is exactly what you pointed out, our own anxiety, our own apprehension about what they're going through.
Yeah.
This is also, I would add, we're adding some kind of group to the work that people are doing, makes it very helpful, because then it becomes clear this is not just this one odd kid who wants to die. This is the kind of feeling that comes up when your father, all these kids lost their fathers, when your father dies, when your home is destroyed, when your school is destroyed. It's inevitable. And I'm working in Uvalde, the same kinds of things are coming up with people there. So when we have a group, we have to become comfortable. If we can create a group, not everybody wants to be in a group, but if you can create a group, then people have the opportunity. Oh yeah, he's feeling the same way, or she's feeling the same way. I'm not crazy. I may be despairing, but I'm not outside the sort of the human race. I don't have to be put in a mental hospital. I'm just a kid or an adult who's gone through a terrible situation. And this is just how I'm feeling now.
Hmm. You know, the other things that strikes me, and if, by the way, if you're watching this live and you have a question for Jim, please feel free to put it in the chat wherever you're watching. What also strikes me is that if you had not been there with those kids in the midst of it and waited 2 years, 5 years later to deal with what happened, it's possible that these kids might have actually taken on these identities, might have continued down that road to a point where it would have been much harder, if not impossible, to rework their narrative, if you will. Speak to that a little bit, and just do you see the kind of, maybe does that speak to the importance of kind of being there in the moment sometimes and not waiting?
Absolutely. In Bosnia, I went to Bosnia with several colleagues, including one of our Susan Lord, a family physician who's one of our Center for Mind Body Medicine faculty at the time. And we saw in Bosnia is the incidence of depression, alcoholism, suicidality, cancer, heart disease, abuse of women and children was off the charts after 4 years of war. So, and it's clear that these patterns, as you're suggesting, these patterns had set in. They'd become solidified in the lives of adults and also children.
Mm-hmm.
So when the war in Kosovo began in 1998, we learned that lesson from Bosnia, from seeing what happened in post-war Bosnia after 4 years of a couple 100,000 people killed and society torn apart. So we went in and started working in Kosovo as soon as the war began, because that was the time. That was the time to work with the women, particularly women and children and older people who were bombed out of their homes. It was time to work in the countryside with them. It was also a time to work with the troops who were trying to monitor the situation and sort of help find a road toward peace, because they were being traumatized at that time. So rather than wait till afterwards, when the patterns are set in, you want to be there as early as possible.
Yeah. This is just, a couple of the takeaways here. Jim, thanks so much for being with Psychotherapy Networker. I'm just learning, and I hope the therapists watching kind of got this too. Would love to hear what you got out of this in the comments, whether you're watching this live or not. Feel free to put your new thoughts or new experiences from what Jim has said in the comments. But I just learned how important it is that you can help kids and adults in the midst of crisis. You don't have to wait a certain time period, and that sometimes it's actually helpful to start right away, to just be there with them. If you can, put them in groups with others who are experiencing it alongside them. I've learned that it's really okay to entertain even the darkest of thoughts that they might be having in those moments, and that's perfectly normal. So much to process here about how we see particularly kids in trauma. I also learned just how you can use artwork and expressives to work with kids in a really concrete way, or adults. Let's not forget adults love it too.
Yeah, and people, you start experimenting with these techniques yourself. And I described probably 20 of the different techniques in transforming trauma, but kind of improvise too. So, for example, walking, and therapists have often walked with patients, taking a walk in nature with the clients or patients you're seeing. So, but experiment for yourself as you go through whatever issues are coming up in your life. Use these tools and techniques, and then when somebody has experienced a major trauma, one of your clients has, or somebody gets in touch with you, you'll feel much more comfortable. It'll be much more easy to step into that situation and be there with them.
Yep. Great. You're getting a lot of love in the comments here. Brina says, thank you. This is a different mindset from what I learned in my training. And I would imagine there's a lot of therapists out there who are experiencing and feeling the same way, that you don't have to wait. There's really things we can do as therapists to help. And it actually, based on the story from Gaza, can actually help not to wait until certain patterns and stories and narratives and mindsets are sort of set in to someone experiencing these things. So I hope you all walk away with nothing else with that. Please check out Jim Gordon's work through the Center of Mind Body for Mind Body Medicine, Center for Mind Body Medicine. His books, Transforming Trauma. Jim is a longtime networker, writer, speaker. He's spoken at our annual symposium in Washington, D.C., which is coming up soon, featuring our main keynotes, Alanis Morissette, Dick Schwartz, Nedra Tawwab, who wrote the book on boundaries, Kate Chard, who developed cognitive processing therapy for trauma, so many others. And then, of course, stay in touch with us through the magazine and becoming a subscriber, please. We'd love to have you. We're here to support therapists like you and provide and bring incredible voices like Jim's to the therapy world. We care very much about psychotherapists. I'm one myself. Jim is one here. And we want to see our field continue to grow. We want to see us continue to stay together. We have a lot of differences and divisions and different licenses, but the practice of psychotherapy is what brings us all together. So thanks for being a part of Psychotherapy Networker. Thank you so much, Jim. Anything else? Any closing thoughts here?
I just want to thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the message at the end, that we all need to come together across. There are certain common denominators that are there across all the theoretical, differences and the differences in licensure, and that we are all in this work together. And the other thing that I just want to emphasize is it does begin with us. And this is the insight, of course, of the sort of what we modern dynamic psychiatry, psychotherapy, going back to the 19th century, that we need to know ourselves, which of course is the deepest insight of Western thought as well. Know yourself and experiment yourself. And then as you learn, you'll feel more and more comfortable working with other people. And I think one of the really nice things about the networker is you give people an opportunity in the networker not only to listen, but also to experience the different approaches and to learn on themselves and then take what they're learning out to serve their clients and patients and students. So thank you. It's great to be here. And also anyone who wants to, please, if you're interested in learning more about the Center for Mind Body Medicine, cmbm.org. We have trainings. We have a training coming up in March. And we're always welcoming psychotherapists to teach our model. And our job is to help you do what you do and to share with you what we do so you can make it a part of your life and your work.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for being here, taking time out of your very busy days and busy schedules. We have a lot more of these coming up. Our new January issue just came out. Just go visit our website, read the new articles. We got some new ones from Gabor Mate, from Nedra Tawwab, and many, many others. So stay with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.